Thank you for returning back after the break. This panel will be in English. So now's a good time to remind you that you can use the app and we'll have simultaneous translation for everyone. But I also wanted to say my name is Michelle Lehman. I'm the managing director of Modus ZAD and also the co-founder of Violence Prevention Network in the US. And so I'm very honored and excited to moderate this panel because my work also kind of goes between Germany and the US a lot. And even though I speak fluently both English and German, I noticed that there are a lot of confusion about what the work looks like related to conspiracy theories and the prevention thereof of conspiratorial thinking. And so even as we face some language barriers, even on this panel, I hope that we'll take the time to really understand what we're each talking about so we can successfully draw out the comparisons and the differences and try to learn from different contexts. So I encourage you also, if you say, despite a fabulous simultaneous translation, I've missed it. I don't know what they're talking about anymore. This doesn't make sense to me in the German context. Please just speak up. So feel free to kind of raise your hand and we'll try to clarify before we continue in our conversation. But I also wanted to say that I'll do my best to kick off a conversation, but we'll reserve plenty of time for questions. So definitely don't be shy. Think about what you'd like to ask and what conversation you'd like to get engaged in. And I'd also encourage you to think of comments. So to interject and say, this doesn't really represent my experience of the practical work that I'm involved in. And so it doesn't have to be purely content questions. And maybe one more comment about the panel, and I'll introduce the faces that you're not familiar with yet. It's a mix of research and practitioners, so I think that can be quite fruitful as we discuss these topics. So I'll start with introducing Professor Dr. Oliver Decker. He's the director of the Else Frenkel-Brunswik Institute and Democracy Research in Saxony, and the director of the Kompetenzzentrums Center for Right-Wing Extremism and Democracy Research, both at the University of Leipzig. He is also professor of social psychology at the Sigmund-Freud-Universität in Berlin, and he co-directs the authoritarianism studies in Germany, which is a widely known, as you all know, study in Germany about authoritarianism. And Cynthia, I hope it's okay if I'll skip you in this context and go straight to Jenny Winkler, who's the director of the Veritas Beratungsstelle, a counseling center in Berlin, Germany, working with conspiracy thinking. And very happy to have you here on the panel and bring your practitioner expertise here. You've headed the Advice Center, started to head the Advice Center fairly recently in January 2025. And you've researched leaving religious movements and ideological groups and also completed further training in what online counseling works. In addition to your work at Veritas, you've also been a lecturer at EH Berlin, where you impart knowledge about dealing with crises, suicidality, and also digitally supported help settings. So welcome. So glad you're on this panel. And then welcome to Marylin Rodriguez, also from PERIL, a colleague of Cynthia, Deputy Director of Training and Partnerships Development for PERIL. You have a Bachelor's of Arts in International Studies and Hispanic Studies, and you work for more than a decade now in education, Fulbright teaching assistant in Uruguay, and also continuing as a language teacher in Maryland and North Carolina. You've also served as assistant principal at a public charter school, working with first-generation Latino and Asian American students. Your areas of interest are educational equity, community organizing, and learning at all levels. And so really looking forward to hearing about your work related to conspiracy thinking. Welcome. Okay. And kind of building on Cynthia's remarks about conspiratorial thinking and conspiracy theories and its developments in the US, I'd like to start out with Oliver, who maybe, Oliver, you can start by sharing a little bit what does the research show about how the development of conspiracy theories and conspiracy thinking and what people believe in terms of conspiracy theories, how that's developing in Germany?
Thank you, Michelle, for the warm welcome. Thank you for the invitation. And I have to excuse me at the beginning for my English. It's a little bit rusty, and maybe it's a chance to improve it, but you have to listen to me while I try to get more familiar with it again. So, but I'm a little bit a lucky guy because Roland Imhoff spoke before, and so I can, you know, a lot of the things we are conducting here in Germany and about the thinking of mentality, conspiracy mentality or conspiracy narratives. And maybe you heard also about the social psychological models to understand those fields. What is new is that I'm closer to a psychoanalytic thinking of this area, not only of conspiracy mentality, but also of the authoritarian dynamic in society. And from our point of view, conspiracy mentality or the seeking of conspiracy narration is a part of the authoritarian dynamic. It's only to understand as a part of a bigger picture, not only as an isolated moment. In the Leipzig Authoritarian Study Program, we do since 2002, we conduct representative surveys every 2 years. Of the general German population and 2,500 participants every 2 years. We do research first at all about right-wing extremism, and this is what we do now also last year, 2024, in our last poll we conducted. But since 2012, we also conduct the conspiracy mentality. And so I mentioned this concept, mentality, for the fourth or fifth time. This is perhaps a good opportunity to say something about this concept. Maybe you heard about it by Roland. I'm not sure about this point. Benjamin Winkler informed me only in a short notice about what has been the topic. What are the topics of Roland's lecture? We think that conspiracy narratives are the one point, but people must have the need to search for those narrations, and it is necessary condition that they are seeking for this. People are not, that's the main idea of this, they are not seduced by conspiracy narratives. They are not buying it because they have a lack of information. They, in contrary, the narrations are those who are needed to fulfill desires by the people. And so also we are talking a lot about internet, TikTok and so on, but the narrations in these places are successful because people want to hear them. They are looking for it, they are searching for it. And the question is, why do they do so? And how many are searching for this? And this is one point, what is the main question of our research, and what I can give you an introduction to is that the highest number of people looking for narrations, conspiracy narrations, were at the beginning of our research when we used for the first time in cooperation with Roland a questionnaire about conspiracy mentality. And this was about, I have to take a look at the book, one moment please. Round about 37%, and the highest, it was the highest number at the beginning 2012. Our interpretation was it was at the when the financial and economic crisis took place, and that was one of the main drivers for those conspiracy mentality and the need to explain the development, and give also a short idea, the first idea, that there is the highest need for those narrations depends on the economy, and especially on economical crisis. It's in a way maybe in Germany a special situation. We describe the situation in Germany as economy as a narcissistic filling or plombage, eine narzisstische Plombe, what means that in Germany we have something like a Wirtschaftschauvinismus, a chauvinism of a strong economy, which gives the people in Germany the feeling of being a strong nation too, because after the World War ends, World War II, and post-NS society, we can see that every idea of being proud of the German nation was out of any legitimation. But the people need this idea. They need the idea of to be a part of a strong nation. There is a need of chauvinism. And to fulfill this need, they used this economical miracle taking place in the early 50s. And since then, this economical grow in Germany is like a fetish for a lot of people, and if the economy is growing, they are accepting democracy, and they have less resentment than in other times. But economical crises are a part of capitalism like the autumn. So every crisis will, every 10 years there will be a crisis. And this time you can see that the ressentiments, it's a different concept to the English resentment, the ressentiments are growing, and so also conspiracy mentality and the need for those narrations. Even in the situation of the pandemic, of the corona pandemic, there were not so much conspiracy mentality as in this time. Mm-hmm. This was the lowest number of conspiracy mentality in this time, around 20 to up to 25%. And so in Germany, we can see maybe a tendency that there is a strong connection between economy, especially with capitalistic economy, and this the need for conspiracy narration. And what we also can see, what maybe is the same in the USA, is that there is a U function of conspiracy mentality between left and right board edges. Yeah, the highest number of people who are looking for conspiracy mentality are in both countries on the left side or on the right side. There's definitely a higher number on the right side, the right side doubles the number. It's around 60% of those who say I'm on the far right side. They share conspiracy narrations, but on the left side, far left, there's also around 37 and more percent, and in the middle or left and middle left and middle right, there are lower number of those who share this. And so far I know, this is the situation in Germany, and so far I know it's the same in the United States. And one point is maybe of relevance, conspiracy mentality and anti-Semitism has a strong connection. It's not the same, but they have a strong connection of 0.50, not exactly 50% are sharing, so of those who share the one are sharing the others, but that would be a misunderstanding. But what we can see is that there's also including to this narrations, conspiracy narrations, there are included anti-Semitic motives, and they make them strong. And we can see maybe that it is like a first contact with the truck of anti-Semitism to be in contact before with the conspiracy narrations. So.
Thank you, Oliver. Cynthia, this reminds me a little bit, Oliver's comments also about the ways you were talking about the scapegoating. And what struck me when you were describing that is some sense of a connection to identity, or how we might feel as a nation or as a people, especially in terms of the scapegoating of LGBTQI+. And so I suspect that maybe the authoritarianism framing is a very particular German sort of lens to it in some sense, but I'm curious how you'd react to Oliver's comments.
Yeah, I would say we're seeing very much the same patterns. You know, I think one of the things that we see both with conspiracy theories and other types of sort of propaganda more broadly is that the research is very similar here, that it's sort of not the people who are most economically disenfranchised who are most vulnerable to it, but people who are kind of at risk of losing something, but either actually at risk or they have had the experience previously of losing something. So, for example, there's a study in Switzerland, I think, that showed that you're not more likely to join the far right if you are unemployed, but you are more likely to join if you grew up in a household with an unemployed parent. So it's the experience of like precariousness or feeling the potential precariousness, whether that's real or perceived. And because so many conspiracy theories and related propaganda say something is going to be taken from you, right? Your election has been stolen. In the US, your gun rights are being taken by Democrats and by governors who are going door to door with the National Guard to seize your guns. Your white majority nation is being stolen in the Great Replacement theory, or your health, your family's health, and your freedoms, right? I mean, in a million different ways that comes up in the US. So the idea that your personal autonomy, your safety, and your well-being is at risk from people who will take something is a very powerful mechanism. We saw, for example, in the January 6th attackers that although they were above average in terms of their own economic well-being, they were employed, but they had had a disproportionate experience of previous bankruptcy or a tax lien or unemployment or a losing their home, with an eviction, right? Sometimes dating all the way back to childhood. So a sort of psychological stance that positions them in a defensive capacity if something could be taken is a vulnerability. We also see that, when the production of that conspiracy theory or propaganda is distributed by someone they think they're supposed to trust, of course, elected officials, the media, influencers who are often using the most outrageous posts to generate subscriptions for their own good, right? I mean, all of those things have been very persuasive. So it's a state of psychological kind of vulnerability to some extent, but also a world in which they are met with conspiracy content all the time in their feeds, on the news, from their president, sometimes from their elected officials. And so it's not like they're going looking for it. It comes to them. And I think that's something we have to understand.
Oliver, I heard you saying a little bit of the opposite, but I think you meant it slightly different, that in fact people do go out looking for it. So maybe you just kind of like to comment on that as well. It's certainly what Cynthia is saying is also true. It's prevalent everywhere. However, I think you meant a certain stance or mentality that is seeking that. So maybe you just kind of like to draw out the difference. How can it both be true that it's pervasive in one sense and you still have to be looking for it?
Yes. First of all, I would try to make one other difference more clearer, because I think in Germany, and this is maybe really very specific for Germany, it's not the personal economical deprivation causing this resentments. It's a situation when the national economical growth is the people are afraid of the economical growth in Germany. This is a very big difference, and as I know, so far I know the literature, it's definitely a difference to other countries, because in other countries it's like you describe. In France, Spain, and the United States, people are angry in the situation when they are afraid of their own wealth or are afraid to lose something. That's more in common. But in Germany, it's the idle object of the strong economy. That's a big difference, and maybe in a sociological, social theoretical way, Germany is maybe also an ideal type to understand the strong connection between economy and the attitudes, because it's not self-understanding why people get more resentments. Also, if they are afraid to lose something of their individual wealth. And I think it's had a lot to do with the, and it's not self-understanding why they are then more on the right-wing extremist side, not on the left-wing. What I would expect, yes, if you say there's a lack how we share the richness of the society, and I want to have my part too. So let us discuss about social situation and benefits. They don't do this. They are full of resentments against those who seems to be weak and so on. And this is what we have to understand. And I would say what I called or we called the conspiracy mentality is a part of the authoritarian dynamic. What means also that it's we have two levels in a way to put it in a nutshell of authoritarian syndrome. The first is, and here came psychoanalysis, the authoritarian dynamic basic or syndrome based on the basis of identification with the father authority. Yeah, we know this, the Führer, a strong person, maybe also an idea, but this is at the border. And then we have those who don't need a father authority, but they are identified with the groups, with a group more than we, and with in a way with a mother authority, with the idea of there is no reality, we have to accept what usually the father stands for, but we are in the group, we must have to accept the Zumutung. What's the meaning of Zumutung? I'm very strong in German in speaking, but not in English. Die Zumutung der Realität.
What reality asks of us or requires of us.
And to be back in a situation where you not have to realize what is part of the reality. And this is the second level of an authoritarian reality, and then you hate those who confrontate you with what you know is the reality. And at least you ask me about why there is so much of narration in the society, and also I would say it's a need, not in a way the people are seduced to. My argument would be the need produce the situation. Yes, it's a medium, we can see it there, but it's a manifestation of the need. It's not the one causes the other. The need causes the presentation and the offer, and not the other produce the need. And that's a way a social psychologist like me, not Roland, would say it in a way. It's the first things are motivation. People, mankind, are motivated, and that's the reason why he or her go to action or looking for things satisfying the needs, and this is the first step. And then there are, especially in the society we are living in, there are people who wants to satisfy these needs. And this is the internet, and the internet is driven by making people looking for more and more and more and more, and that's the reason when you realized, the algorithms realized, this one likes every conspiracy narration, even if they are completely widersprüchlich in this contradiction, then you will present them. And if you stop, and this is maybe a problem for the limitation, this is maybe a limitation of the work you are doing, because you cannot start with giving more information and so on. This is not the problem. Most of the people, in a way, know that this is not true. They know it. It's fetishism. Yes, they know it, but they deny it for the moment. To deny something means you know what is true, but you don't want to hear it. And this is what we have to face. And the question is why there is this need, and how is it produced, and in which way. And there we have to look and to plan the intervention.
Thank you, Oliver. This is actually a perfect transition to our practitioners also here on this panel. Jenny, maybe you could just start a little bit by describing your work. I'll say too that as part of the project that's organizing this conference, we at Modus did a bit of an assessment as to what kind of prevention approaches around conspiracy theories exist across Germany, and haven't been able to do the same research in the US, but are really interested in comparing approaches. So Jenny, please, just describe what your work at Veritas involves, and
Okay, yeah. So the Veritas Counseling Center is in Berlin. It was established in 2021. And we are an interdisciplinary team working together, and we provide counseling for all individuals affected by conspiracy theories, meaning the personal environment, but also the professional, and everyone who wants to distance themselves from conspiracy theories. It's free. You don't have to pay for it because it's funded by the Berlin Office Against Violence, and it's confidential. The counseling is face-to-face or in an online setting, like video or mail counseling. And the people who come to seek counseling are family members, neighbors, parents, adult children, but also colleagues, and we reach out to the professional field, so teachers, therapists who have clients who believe in conspiracy theories. And yeah, the people who want to distance themselves, it's a small number, but I think it's still relevant, and so everyone is welcome who has like doubts or who is even interested in a conspiracy theory, and they're like, okay, I don't know if it's the right thing for me. And who want to get help in the distancing process. I think that's most important. Oh, we have a self-help group, and we work together with the colleagues because there are a lot of different counseling centers in Germany. Yeah.
Thank you, Jenny. I'd be interested to hear how you would respond to Oliver's sense that conspiratorial thinking also involves a certain sense of denial, as eine Verleugnung, that there's actually kind of a need there to want to believe these things. I know you said the number of cases of people who are actually interested in distancing themselves is small compared to maybe all the intimate bystander and loved ones that are seeking support. But does that ring true to you, or do you feel like you've had different practical experiences in the cases that you work with?
I think I would argument more with the sunk cost fallacy. You bring so much into it, you lose family members, sometimes you lose your job, or you lose your house because you don't pay taxes. You invest so much, and then it's really hard to get out of it and to leave everything behind. I think that's more of it. But of course, sometimes we believe things because they form our identity, and they fulfill needs. We also work with a needs-oriented approach, and I think that's very important to understand what brings people to conspiracy theories. I mean, you can compare it to the needs or needs who lie behind drugs or alcohol, like all kinds of addictions, I think. Yeah.
And we heard a wonderful case study from a previous speaker here, the Demokratieforschung Sachsen, about what a call for help might look like. Do you have any other examples you'd like to share? You know, what are, especially bystanders or loved ones, what are they hoping to get from your services?
I think most of the relatives just want to talk and to find someone who believes them, and to also, of course, get ideas in how to reflect or change the communication, because they find out it's not working. I present so many facts. Why is it not working? Why doesn't it help? Usually the relatives, they don't want to lose their loved ones or like siblings or partners. And then we have a lot of cases with child welfare concerns, because, I don't know, you have two parents, one parent comes to us and they say, my partner believes in conspiracy theories, and then they found this healer, and now, like, it starts with anti-vax, but then it comes to chlordioxide, I don't know what the English word is, chlorine dioxide, I don't know, yeah, and that kind of stuff. So also, like, really destructive methods. They worry for self-harm, or people buy guns and they worry, that kind of stuff. Yeah, Reichsbürger movement, I think that's maybe a topic we talk about later, but yeah, or sometimes it starts with my mother votes for AfD now, what can I do? And then we find out, okay, there's a lot of conspiracy thinking in the background. Yeah.
Thank you, Jenny. I've also found it really interesting that in this whole theme, one is sort of constantly required to jump between a very meta level of sort of threat to democracy and loss in trust in major institutions, and sometimes without the sort of practitioner view on it, we lose sight of the harm that it does to individuals and all they lose and all the suffering that they do. So a perspective of harm reduction, I think, is really interesting for the individuals that practitioners are working with. Thank you, Jenny. I'd love to pass it on to Marylin. Marylin, perhaps you can tell us more about your work and yeah, how it relates to conspiracy.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having us. It is such a pleasure to be here. Before I jump in to tell you more about what I do, what we do at our research lab, I'm kind of curious, actually, about who's in the audience, because this is a question that is really burning. If you don't mind raising your hand and showing if you are a current educator or former educator or school leader, if you don't mind raising your hand. Okay. And I think that translates, right? You said that, yeah, as school leaders, teacher, educator. Okay. Oh, sorry. If you can show your hands again one more time so that, okay. So the reason why I asked this question is because for me to be on this stage is pretty unusual in the United States. We educators and school leaders just don't really, are not really part of the conversation on how do we prevent radicalization, extremism, how do we deal with conspiracy theories. And so this is one of the things that PERIL is very different. We use a multidisciplinary approach to dealing with these challenges. And so I've spent most of my time working with young people, working with teachers, training them. And so what I do now at our research lab is I bring that experience to translate the tools and resources that our content experts create so that we can then take them into the communities that need them the most. And sometimes what that means is translating from very academic terms to very simple terms, the harms that exist online. That's it. That's pretty much what we do. And one of the things that we've learned, so part of what I do is set up trainings, set up workshops. We've learned that even words like radicalization in the US context are very problematic. Because when you say the word radicalization, to some people, that is, the left is radicalized, and then to other people, the right is radicalized, right? And so already, if you say, oh, we're doing a workshop on youth radicalization, that can already mean that a parent is coming in and shutting down immediately. And so one of the big lessons that we've learned through our work is that, for example, we need to learn to translate our work in ways that can be processed by a larger group of people. And so, for example, even conspiracy theories, that's very political, very, very political. Because there are many people in the media right now who use those words and they kind of use them as shields, right? Like, oh, they call me conspiratorial, ha, 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 those leftists. And so then it's hard for you to come into certain communities to try to warn them about these dangers when they are already coming in with that idea that conspiratorial thinking is what you're going to blame me for believing in X, Y, and Z. That has been one of the very, very interesting discoveries. And so, for example, we have translated some of our trainings into harmful online behaviors, right? That is a much broader concept that probably any parent, any teacher can get on board with that, because a lot of times, you know, even when you're talking about radicalization, it's going to be a small number of students who might radicalize. But there's going to be many, many, many more that are going to show evidence or symptoms of the same problem, right? Who are going to start using racist language, that are going to do something to harm a female student. And so that is one of the reasons why we train parents in a broader sense. Now, the concepts are still embedded in there, right? Part of what we're trying to warn them is that there are some red flags along the way that could lead a young person into violent radicalization. So coming back to conspiracy theories, I think one of the things that we have also just learned, that conspiracy theories like the Great Replacement have become very common language in America. And so it's important for families to note and teachers to note that if young people are starting to talk about some of these, Great Replacement theory, that's a place where they need to start to intervene. Now, I have to tell you all that I am so jealous from being here and just seeing, again, the number of educators in the room, even hearing what you were sharing in terms of the access to support for someone who has already started going down that path. We have nothing of that. I mean, I would love for you to research more on it, but I'm pretty sure your research is going to be very short because there's just like not much. There isn't. It's sad. There's a reason why this conspiratorial thinking, as you saw the long list from Cynthia's presentation earlier, it's just not there. And I think there's a lot of contributing factors to that I'm sure maybe we'll get into that to talk about the education system in the United States. I mean, there's just a lot of really sad things happening there right now that have been happening for a long time. It's not new. So I'm happy to answer any other questions, but yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Marylin. You actually touched on quite a few points that I'm highly interested in. And you're right, in a little, my sense is, in our research in Germany, we encountered over 120 projects that are working, directly related to conspiracy thinking across Germany, and more than 20 counseling centers specifically, or projects specifically dedicated to conspiracy theories. And my one hypothesis was, I wonder whether that's just not possible in the U.S. And even because of the term triggering, almost being counterproductive in the U.S. cultural context. So I'd love to hear more about that. But also, there are a lot of counseling centers here that also refrain from using the term conspiratorial thinking or conspiracy theories, in favor of something a bit more generic, like Counseling Center for Worldview you questions in order to not immediately stigmatize. Nonetheless, for the kind of service population that Jenny is talking about, people who, I don't know what to do with my dad anymore, we need to be able to signal those offerings in sort of an efficient way. So yeah, I'm curious to hear here, and I guess one other hypothesis I had was around free speech. There's some hesitation about an American cultural, not just value, but constitutional right to have a certain opinion, but the way that gets interpreted in a US context.
Yes, I think, well, the first thing to note is that in the US, there's just very few federal mandates on what schools can or should do. That just does not exist. And so that already is in itself a big difference. And I'm going to speak mostly about the K-12 space because that's really where I have spent most of my time, and now in higher ed as well. And so that means that there's a lot of the work done in schools is locally decided. Curriculum, you name it, every program is done in that way. And so that's what presents a challenge, is because it is very difficult to try to reach every school in the country at once. And so then that means that educators are left to either rely on their district, their local district, to share these resources and these ideas and these programs and fund them, or the internet. That's pretty much it, right? And so even something like, in the work that we do, digital literacy is obviously at the center of what we're really trying to emphasize, because there's no funding. There's no resources for it at a federal level. And so you can imagine the challenge that presents. If you're not doing, every single student will have a computer in a school, most likely, but have no curriculum on how to use that computer, how to use the computer. And so then imagine, then if we talk about the dangers that exist in the internet, how you should behave on the internet, there's nothing. So it will come down to specific districts, that some who are doing a really good job, but most are not. Because they're, one of the statistics that I wanted to bring you, just for everybody here to know, everybody tells me, the US is great, but it's got a lot of things that it's got to work on. But in the US, we have about a 79% literacy rate. 79% for one of the most powerful and richest countries in the world. It would be nice if that made a headline, right? That they are focusing on how do we help people. And when I say literacy, is that they can read and write in English, right? And so you can imagine thinking critically is just unheard of. And so then this is what it ties down to everything that we're going to talk about here today. Everything that, I couldn't agree more with some of the things that were raised about the economy, right? Like you think about the Great Replacement theory, this anti-immigrant sentiment that then ends up being blamed on a certain specific group of people. It's all tied together, right? And people really fighting for basic, opportunities. So it's really tough when you're trying to do this work and you feel like you're the only ones. I think, thankfully, we're part of a research lab that, again, our tools are available for free. We cannot meet the demand that we have of people who are asking for us to support them. For everything from private schools to public schools, doesn't matter. There's just so much desire. And I hope that Cynthia gets to talk a little bit more about actually some of the work that we're doing through what we call our care centers, because it's modeled after the German model. Really, this whole week, I've just feel like my eyes have been opened. Other than wanting to move here, I just my eyes have been open to a whole world of possibility of how it should be. So yeah.
Well, maybe I can just ask one follow-up question of Jenny, just to respond to some things that Marylin had said, and then we'd love to hear about the care centers. Jenny, I'm curious, how do you approach the term conspiracy thinking or theories in your conversations with clients? Is that always front and center, or are there times when when you say I don't use those terms, I'm not talking about that directly? And then my second sort of question would also be, what role do you think the digital literacy and media literacy, so kritische Medienkompetenz, plays in the context of your work?
The first question I can answer very short. I always use the term the clients use. That's it. Yeah. And the second question about media literacy, I think it's an important part, but if you're in like psychosocial counseling, sometimes other things are more important in the beginning. So this is what I think in the needs-oriented approach, and you see people are really in crisis, And I think one of the main problems is loneliness. So if there's community in the online world and they support each other and they feel others have the same needs and the same ideas, I cannot take it from them. And because I don't have anything else to replace, so community-based approaches I think are very important. And then I think you could, how to say it, connect it with media literacy, but as a community-based approach, I think. But of course, we also do it in the counseling, talks. You talk about it. What are your arguments? Where do you find them? Why do they support your worldviews? Why not? How do you feel about my worldviews, which are very different from yours? But it's more in an approach of agree to disagree, and yeah. I don't think it answers your question.
I would just add onto that, I think that we see there are certain kinds of conspiracy theories that are more damaging than others, right? So a lot of people might hold some beliefs partially in a conspiracy theory that they never take action on, but then the kinds of conspiracy theories that we worry about are ones that both shape their views of violent action, but also decisions they might make about vaccines, for example, or things that go against public health expertise and knowledge. And there, a lot of times what we're seeing is that people are motivated to engage because they're lonely on the one hand. That makes them vulnerable. I think that all of those vulnerabilities are really true, but also they want something like a sense of meaning and purpose. So there's the flip side of it, right? It's not just the loneliness and isolation, but also the desire to have something bigger and better than themselves. And that's where this kind of being a part of something that is like a puzzle-solving club, where they feel like they're on the inside. They are part of the inside of this group, and they know something, and it gives them a sense of way to stay engaged, right? Often, and then sometimes there's a call to purpose, a call to action that is dangerous that comes out of that, right? So violent action to attack groups, as we see in El Paso and Pittsburgh and Buffalo, all of those motivated by conspiracy theories, but also the QAnon kidnappings and the vaccine hesitancy, even in the measles outbreak in the US right now. This is, those are where we see especially problematic outcomes that are often driven by kind of positive psychological needs, right? And so it's not just, we have to address the negative things, but also find ways to steer people toward a way to have a more positive sense of belonging and meaning and purpose. Just to answer the question about the care center, I was in Berlin doing field research in Berufsausbildung, the Berufsausbildungssystem in Berufsschulen in Berlin, when the first mobile Beratung sort of came around, right? So I was studying in Baubereich, like in a particular type of school as a comparative education professor at the time. I was really interested in how young people make the transition to adulthood during German unification after that period and the European integration. And when I arrived in the school, it was at a period of time in 99, 2000, 2001, all the way up to 2004. I was doing field work there. at 3 schools, but in the construction trade school in particular, the Sozialkundelehrer were really struggling, the social studies teachers, with a lot of young men who had shaved heads and bomber jackets and combat boots. And so I became this kind of accidental expert on school-based responses in Germany to resurgent anti-Semitism and far-right extremism. And I got really interested in this idea of the mobile Beratung and followed that model as it expanded. So from one little center to 50 centers to a master's program that trains the counselors to a network of, as you know, of standards and training modules. I mean, we have nothing like that. So together with the Southern Poverty Law Center, we decided to model to see if we could pilot that approach in the US, the concept, and launched a pilot. We came here and studied it a little bit. We talked to some people in the Berlin Mobile Beratung and did a lot of conversations, and then launched in the states of Georgia and Michigan a 2-year pilot, which is coming to an end later this spring, in the end of May, June. And I would say we learned a few things. One, the demand is extremely strong for the idea, right? So even before we have concluded the pilot, we have 6 other states asking, how do we get a care center, right? We call them community advisory resource and education centers. We want one too. We haven't even, and we said, don't you want to see the evidence first, to see if it works? But no, they just want one. They need something, right? There's nothing. I mean, it's so hard to overstate the absence of interventions on any of these issues in the US. I mean, we have pockets, right? I think you're in Pittsburgh, right? There's the Life After Hate, one exit organization, one parents advisory group called Parents. We all know them, right? Yes. We can name them on 2 hands. There's us designing tools. We're just 25 people. You know everybody in the space, and there's hardly anything happening. And so that's the one thing, is we just get more requests than we can deal with. Seth and I, my colleague, are leaving a little bit early tomorrow because we have to get on a 3-hour phone call with the state of Washington, where they're on a task force to produce a kind of public health approach to prevention of violent extremism that has used as a case study in the legislative write-up the care center model, the mobile Beratung model here. So, it's not like the be-all, end-all, as we would say. It's not the final idea that we would have, but it's one idea when there are so few ideas. We would never have federal funding for it, I think, even under a different administration. So it has to be funded by a combination of state and city and local support and philanthropic support. And so that's another thing we learned. We'll never get the scale that you have here on that, but we might be able to get to some version of it with local philanthropic support and cities and states and counties. We've also learned that the hardest part for us is the staffing, hiring the right people. In part because we're trying to hire people for a concept that doesn't exist in a center that isn't yet built, when they don't really understand the model. And so we tend to attract staff who are advocacy folks, who really are out there and maybe would have trouble, for example, with we don't want to work with that group, right? We want to work with people who share our values, right? And so we have really had to say, if we're working with parents, we're working with parents, right? If you're working with schools, you're working with everybody. You can't pick and choose who gets the interventions based on who shares your values. And so that's difficult, right? Children deserve resources, the families deserve resources. And so that's been different because we don't have these more nonpartisan approaches in the US very clearly because it's all privately organized. So I think there's been a lot of lessons learned. We'll be writing up the evaluation of it. We're currently fundraising for it to get it expanded, and we have some funding from the states that want to bring it in. But we're guided in part by the fact that it took Germany 25 years to build this incredible infrastructure, and so it should be a 25-year project. Our advisory board says, no, we should be able to skip ahead, get it in 5 years, but we're just 2 years into the pilot. So.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. I've seen Oliver write a lot of notes, so I think you have a few things you might like to say. I just wanted to say that reassures me because, you know, as we started working with Violence Prevention Network in the U.S., kept making calls, kept asking, kept researching, who are we missing? And I said, this cannot be, we must be doing this wrong. So thank you again for saying that, and really wonderful to hear your work as well. So.
Yes, I'm not sure about whether I can put something new in the discussion, but it was a very impressive insight in your work and the situation in the United States, and it is maybe possible to make a connection to some reflection we try the last couple of years, because it's on the first glance it's definitely much more difficult in the United States to work against this resentment, the conspiracy, and it feels like, hearing to your description, it feels like feeling helpless, and you described it, 25 years, maybe around 25 years, 30 years of funding by the government of democracy, of social workers for democracy, so democracy projects, and so on. And I think it was necessary and still is, but it has its contradictions, and maybe it's very important to reflect them in the same moment you try to copy them, not to copy the mistakes or so on, but maybe you have no chance to copy the mistakes, because our problem is, or difficulties is, resides of the state funding or governmental funding, because these programs are necessary, definitely, there is no doubt. Those programs defending democracy, but on the other hand, because the democracy is threatened, definitely in Germany, also by those narrations, but also by the resentments in everyday life for those who are not part of the majority, and you will always find someone who is not part of the majority, to legitimate violence. But on the other hand, in the moment, the state fund the democratic civil society, and it becomes stronger, it becomes more vulnerable, because it's a representation of the state in the same moment. It's a part of the state. And this means also it's a representation, to say it with a psychoanalytical term, concept of the superego. You have not to do this, also you have the desire. And this is a problem, because people usually don't like superegos. They like their desires, and those who say you allowed, like someone who Trump is. Yeah, you can desire everything you want to. You can behave like the last bully, whatever. It's allowed and not forbidden. And we are the representation of, it's not a good idea, think about it. Keep control of your desires, be a part of enlightenment process, and so on. And this is not what people like after maybe 30 years of neoliberalism and so on. They are, in a way, they want to get rid of all these things, and this is a problem. We are in the same in a way, you know, I'm a critical theorist, and critical theory is is a neo-Marxian theory. So I would say this society also are ruled by fundamental antagonism and contradictions. And we as a civil society started as a critique of society and ended in this moment as a defender of the society. And this makes our position very, very vulnerable and weak. This is because we are a representation of the state, we are a representation of the superego, funded by the government, and we have to think about this, and maybe it's not a good idea to copy this complete.
Yeah, maybe I'll just say quickly, we are adapting, not copying. So I think that's really important to see what you have learned. So one of the things that we learned, particularly because of the funding system in our country, we have to have evidence constantly for everything we do. So every tool we pre and post test, all the videos, we have comparison control groups. We're accompanying everything with rigorous scientific statistical analysis, which makes it slow. But because we have to convince funders very clearly that this is worth their intervention, especially right now where there's so many needs, right, to step in and fill the gap of the government. I wanted to just say one thing because I realized we didn't answer your question about free speech, and I think this is really interesting. I've heard several times now senior officials in the U.S. administration, even under the last administration, say things like it's not their job to prevent someone from becoming radicalized. It's their job to prevent a radicalized person from picking up a gun, right? So the official U.S. government stance at the federal level is secondary prevention, right? That's where the emphasis has been, not primary prevention. Because the U.S. government has seen primary prevention as infringing on free speech. That if you try to change everybody has the right to become radicalized. They can believe whatever they want. You just don't want those people to pick up a gun and be violent about it. That started to change only during the pandemic. That's the first time I started to see that we made some progress in making the argument that it might not be in the best interest of the democracy itself or of the public health of the nation to let people in an unfettered way just go believe every conspiracy theory and every form of propaganda. And so there have been now, over the past 4 or 5 years, some investments from the federal government on primary prevention. That, I think, is now over. So that's where I think we have to completely go back to philanthropic state, local funding. And so we already just had barely made a tiny bit of progress on, I say that as someone who believes in primary prevention, which is what we do primarily. I think we will now see a return to secondary prevention being the focus of the federal government, if at all. And the issue of free speech really being at the center of that, like who gets to decide what is disinformation. We've already seen a lot of attacks on that. Who gets to decide what's a conspiracy theory, and then of course the idea that it doesn't matter anyway because people have the right to believe whatever they want. Right? There's a book by Eric Bleich called "Freedom to be Racist," which is about really the U.S. approach. There's almost nothing that you can't say.
Thank you. I would like to open it up to the audience. I think it's very much time to do so. I have one last question, though, for Jenny, because I'm wondering, and this might just have to do with your particular work at PERIL, but the focus of and I think this has been the case in Germany a lot when it comes to supporting and strengthening democracy, civic education, the prevention of radicalization. We've focused on areas where, at least in Germany, there's the opportunity or a reason for intervention. So in the context of youth and children, or youth and schools and that sort of thing. But especially on our topic, and this is why maybe I was going to focus this question back on Jenny a bit, is I believe in the context of conspiracy thinking, we have parents calling about their children. It's in some sense it's perhaps, and please, anyone can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but also an older demographic that somehow needs to be reached. So I'm wondering what your experiences are, Jenny, with a sort of non-youth service population or people that you work with.
Yeah, usually parents, the children call for their parents. That's a difference. I think. We published our annual record, and I don't know if I remember correctly, but I think 1 in 13 people or something is under 30 of the index clients, like the conspiracy believers, which is not representative because a certain group of people seek advice, and but I think it's a problem of the elderly people, at least in our context. But we also have a lot of counseling requests from teachers, for example, or like youth welfare workers when it comes to gender-based ideology, like incel ideology, anti-feminism, that kind of stuff. Yeah. But I don't know, and yeah, I wouldn't say that. For example, we have clients who are over 70 or sometimes 80 years old. You can still work with them, and you can still listen to their worldviews, and they can still change. But I think the systemic approach to include the family and to include people who are important to them, and to also have an approach which means if you take something from them, you have to add something, and this is of course the social system. This is meaning of life. This is kind of purpose, and let the purpose be like a garden group or whatever. Yeah, this is like my social worker approach, because I think it's really important that conspiracy theories give you something. And if you're happy with them, okay, what's the sense of changing it? Yeah, but of course, usually cases that come to us because there is kind of people see danger, yeah, self-harm, what we talked about, weapons and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Thank you, Jenny. Yeah, I'm looking out to the audiences. Are you standing just for? Okay. Yeah. Any questions? Yeah, here. Harald?
Thank you. I was just, when you said, Cynthia, it's 25 years, and then Oliver said it all, that needs to be said. You can definitely have some shortcuts, and please, I don't want to make this a German discussion here. Give us a call once you get, we're not going to live the day when the US gets the funding in the magnitude that we have, but give us a call. You can, there is, and Oliver, I'm really thankful. I want to say this in public here. I'm thankful for the voice that I've heard about the criticism on, the program funding that we have, and the closeness to government and all the implications of political pressure, of conflict of interest and all the rest of it. But this is not the audience to make this a German reflection. I just mentioned that. And a voice like yours, within the bubble, I rarely hear it. And most of the time, it's my own voice. So I think there is a couple of elephants in the room here. There's a couple of discussions to be led, but that's actually not the view of our American guests. That are actually, I have a question for you. It goes in a different direction. Have you actually been in contact, other than Mobile Beratungen, which is always a good resource, with the Canadian colleagues? Yeah, I mean, this is just. They don't have that much funding either.
Yeah,
but
better than us.
But yeah, of course, yeah, they're Canadian, as we've heard from Trudeau, and this comes with a whole lot of implications.
Yeah, with Canadian and Norwegian and New Zealand are the three places I think that, in addition to Germany, we see models, and of course we work closely with the Canadian colleagues to look at models like therapeutic. They're doing a lot of therapeutic work with social psychologists through family counseling as a model, which we're not doing very much at all. And mental health counselors are really struggling with not having places to get trained when they have clients, for example, who are expressing both conspiracy theories but also other types of harmful ideas about equality or about democracy or about anti-government propaganda. And there are really very few resources. And Canada has developed a network of mental health practitioners and also some models for providing that. We have one pilot that I know of in Boston at Children's Hospital, actually. So it's not nothing, but nothing like what they've developed so far in Canada. So yes, we go sometimes back and forth to Ottawa to pick their brains. So it's faster than coming here, although not quite as lovely with the cake and all the colleagues.
Other questions?
Yeah, during the coffee break, I already tried to approach you, Cynthia, and would like to come back to that question now. In your very interesting talk earlier, you mentioned that the biggest driving forces for conspiracy theories you would make as anti-Semitism and anti-feminist beliefs, right? And I must admit, I'm rather new to dealing with conspiracy theories in a professional setting. But to my knowledge before, it was mostly anti-Semitism that was always like the core ideology of all these conspiracy theories. In your observation, do you think that changed? Is this misogynist approach, is it something that came recently during the last decade of years maybe? Or has it always been part of conspiracy theories?
Yeah,
and because I just to add that, because I was wondering if my misogynist thoughts and also anti-feminist theories would be the core now, or maybe one of the biggest core ideologies.
Yeah.
Would that be a pedagogical approach also to combat conspiracy theory?
It's a good question that I don't think we have the evidence on the second part yet, but on the first part, I think there are two things happening. One, I think we have, it took us a long time to see it, including me. It took me a long time to see it. We were mapping the propaganda for a long time and seeing the anti-Semitism. And it sort of like slowly became clear that there was almost always anti-feminism in there too, especially around birth rates, reproductive control, but also reduction of rights. Some calls to repeal the 19th Amendment, to reduce women's right to vote, to walk back rights on sexual assault claims, right? All kinds of things like that they've been in there, and part of the conspiracy against men, basically, against white men, and against white Christian men in particular. So one, I think it took us in the field, a lot longer to recognize it than it should have. So it's probably been there for longer than we were quicker to see the anti-Semitism, because it was so core for so long to far-right movements and to far left. There's a lot of anti-Semitism on the left as well. But we also have seen in a documented way increases in online misogyny starting in 2011 in the data. And then the introduction of like influencers, thousands of them, like Andrew Tate, who are kind of selling a package of subscription material that has drawn in huge numbers of young men. So we have data that like some 20% of 18 to 23-year-olds in the US before the election said they trust Andrew Tate more than Joe Biden. So, it's a really trusted figure for a lot of young men. And is selling a package of exploitation of women. And that opens the door to a lot of other influencers. And the Center for Counting Digital Hate has tracked with sock puppet accounts, meaning fake accounts for teenage boys, that Andrew Tate and other influencers like him are encountered by new accounts online in just 4 minutes. So 4 minutes of online time. The previous data I'd seen from 2 years ago showed it was 9 minutes. So it's getting shorter of how quickly people encounter that content, even again when they're not looking for it. So the rise of anti-feminist conspiracy theories as part of this, and I think we see some of those effects in the election as well, have to do with very real crises for boys and men in the US, and I'm not sure what the data is here, but 3/4 of the deaths of despair, we call them, which are suicides, overdoses, and alcohol-related deaths, 4 times the suicide rate of women, much higher rates of isolation, depression, anxiety, lack of friends. All of the data is really bad for young men in particular. But as I often say, there's really no logical reason to explain why a crisis of men and boys should have become a crisis of misogyny unless you look at what happens online, because they're not asking for more resources to address the challenges. They're creating scapegoat, and fear-mongering kind of conspiracies about who is to blame. So it's a lot of different things happening. I think some of it is our own failure to see the patterns in time, including me. But also very real increases in the online circulation. And this is, and Marylin can say, the number one request we have from schools right now is about misogyny and also the use of tech-enabled sexual harassment, like AI-generated nude undressing apps and videos that boys are creating for their girl classmates. But maybe you can say something about that tomorrow at the workshop too.
Yeah, I think you already said it. It is overwhelming, honestly. The moment that you have a conversation with any educator, school leader, and sometimes the parents as well. Parents, although, seem to be a little more oblivious about it. And you see it all over. Just a lot of concern about what boys are repeating, what they're doing in some cases, right? Like, and that's one of the hardest things that we have at the lab right now is that they tend to seek us when they're already under crisis. And that's just not the work that we do, right? Like our work is centered around prevention. So trying to help schools prevent that culture from taking root in their schools. So right now we're kind of doing a little bit of both. At the same time as we're doing the prevention work, we're also trying to develop resources for schools to support them because we don't want to leave them hanging. So we have a team of mental health counselors and researchers and you name it, experts. And as someone you were asking about working with our Canadian partners, we are having these conversations about, for example, I'm part of a work group on youth red flags. And so part of what we address is everything from how do you deal with that misogynistic culture that then is turning into violence. And there are some pretty ugly groups out there who are really trying to, use sextortion and other very, very harmful ways of getting young people to do things online that what we know is that a lot of educators are not even aware of. So there's a big push that thankfully it is happening in partnership also with FBI and a lot of other organizations that do have the communication power that we don't, to try to figure out how do we get these prevention strategies to the public. So I probably should correct that there's it's not like nothing is happening, but it's very slow moving, as Cynthia said. And so we're really excited that this year Cynthia has a new book coming out, so look out for it. It's called Man Up. It's great. So I know she's going to have some opportunities to come back to Germany to do some talks around the book, but the book is also going to be a way for us to connect to communities. And then I'll probably be part of her team coming in to do some workshops to the places that we're going to go to. So I think that's a good thing is that, nobody's stopping us. So we're going to keep trying to work against this tide and hopefully bring these resources to as many people as we can.
Any other questions? We have here another one from...
Just a quick prompting question for all of you, actually, on the level of what should we do, what can we do methodologically. If you just think of, and you're in very different fields, working schools, we're working with schools a lot too, and I fully support. There's nothing works without education in schools, and counseling centers and all that. If you think of the most important element of, let's call it good practice, or what to do, or the most important one or two, three, across the level of the spectrum of things that you do here, what would that be?
Perhaps we want to start with Jenny. Do you want to take this one first from your experience?
The most important point. I think I heard the first time about debunk bot. I think it's called debunk bot. I think we do the same kind of thing, which is like a very appreciative language with the clients about them being human and a person, but being critical with the narratives. I think this is one of the most important approaches we have, and also to stay in the relationship even if you disagree, because usually they don't make that. They don't experience that anymore. Usually people agree, they are surrounded by yes-sayers, or they don't have the people in their surround system anymore. And also, as a mental health practitioner, teacher, therapist, whatever, to reflect your own worldviews, your own religious and political standpoint, and to be able to talk about it. So we made the experience that it creates a lot of security for the work with believers if they know where you stand. And also creating security, I think, or safety is a better word, is very important, not to take it away from them, but to create safety, to be critical but still open-minded, and to look out for therapeutic material behind the conspiracy theory. I think that's, for me, the most important points.
I think you might have said it this earlier, Jenny. Belonging is a word that comes out a lot in our work. We did a training last year with school leaders, teachers, counselors, all a very intensive kind of fellowship. And at the end of the fellowship, you know, we talked about all of the things that we've been talking about today. And at the end, the biggest word that really resonated with them was the word belonging, because what they could trace from the beginning of the training to the end was this idea that isolation and loneliness were actually was what was hurting their students, and that was the thing that they really needed to work against. And so I think for a lot of these fellows, they walked out with a plan on how they could try to bring that back to their schools so that they could fight that loneliness and that isolation. It's just unfortunate that, you know, devices, phones, computers have really separated us. We spend more time on our phones, and so we're spending less time, therefore, connecting with one another. And when I say that, you're not connecting with your family, you're not connecting with your friends. So of course we're not connecting as, you know, members of a community. And so I think that as we do this work, and I think you really said it better than I can, it really is important to maintain the relationships with people, even when they believe in things that are different from what we believe in, because I hope that the US right now is a bad example of what polarization is doing to us as a society. And I think partly it's just hyper, it's like on turbo because of how easily accessible the phones and computers and the internet is. So yeah, I think we have to come back to thinking about some very basic principles of community and et cetera.
I'll answer it with my researcher hat on, which is to say that I have ideas also that we can talk about later about, you know, what practitioners can do, what communities can do. But I would say one of the things we try very hard to push the tiny field in the US to consider is the importance of testing interventions, not just to see what's effective, but to see what backfires. And the place where that matters the most is on conspiracy theories. There's a very high risk that interventions to counter conspiracy theories can actually reinforce the conspiracy theory that you're trying to prevent from taking root, because if people, especially for people who already believe it, engaging with them, you tend to be seen as part of the conspiracy, right? And so we have found, for example, we just did 4 pre-bunking videos for anti-Semitism on 2 different types of anti-Semitic beliefs. And of the 4, so it was 2 different types, 2 lengths of video each. 1 had a backfire effect, and 3 were effective in a statistically significant way, and 1 was especially effective, the longest one of the types. And so that's the one we're promoting. It takes a little longer to do that, right? I mean, and so you have to convince a funder, and you have to make sure the funders support that type of testing, and you have to partner ideally with universities who have the capacity to have a postdoc assigned to that can be funded by the funder, and that may not be possible in Germany. We have worked very hard with our funders and partners to make sure that we include the testing before we release the tools, and especially on conspiracy theories where we don't release tools if there's any backfire effect at all. And so I think that's the most important thing I would emphasize is like it slows it down, but our first principle should be not making things worse. And some of what we've done in the field historically has made things worse.
Yes, what I can say now is only some add-on of what you talked about. We conducted also group discussions with young adults the last 1.5 years about radicalization processes, but in fact, not surprisingly, they are talking a lot about the internet and what they experience there. And I would say it's very true, they need competences to deal with this, but I would mention that it's not only competences, in a way they need adults who contain what they are seeing and what they're experiencing. I think that's the main problem. Maybe you think about this also when you talk about loneliness. The problem is they are confronted with a lot of contents in the internet full of violence, and they are not prepared of this, and they are not prepared for this, and there is no one who can give them words for what they are seeing. And this is a duty of adults to talk about this, to contain it. This is a term of the psychoanalysis to deal with all the bad elements they see there and give an interpretation why they are so attractive. That is one problem we also learned from this group discussion, that the young adults know that this is malignant. That is a malign process, but and they try to delete the apps, TikTok and so on, from the smartphones, and it's a miracle. 1 week later, the app is on the smartphone again. Yeah, and how to deal with this situation? They are searching for these things what are too much for them, and what can we do as adults to give them a space, a place where they can find a speech, what happened, a psychic representation of this, and so on.
Good. Benjamin.
Okay, I have another issue that is maybe very interesting, even for my work. At this time in Germany, we are really concerned about the rising, not only conspiracy believings, but especially right-winged believings in the younger groups. For example, if you look on the voting results, you can see a lot of young men and women vote for the AfD, and also you can see this in the research. I think this is very interesting, because in the pandemic we see another result. If we, for example, look to the demonstrations on the streets, which we have in Germany, demonstrations against the pandemic rules, and there a lot of people also showed a lot of conspiracy believings when they go to the demonstration, like the pandemic is not true and stuff like this. But in this time, in the pandemic time, it was not the younger group, it was more the group of the 40-aged and older. So my question is, especially to Oliver and to Cynthia, if there is a difference between right-winged believings on the one side and conspiracy believings on the other side, that you can maybe say for the youngers, the right-winged believings are more interesting, or they are more popular, so they can radicalize, especially for young men, I have to say, because we can also see a gender difference if we look to that issue. But the conspiracy believings are maybe not as popular in the younger groups. So it's my question.
I will try to answer to this question and start with something different. Surprisingly, the number of people sharing or searching for conspiracy narratives in our representative survey was lower than ever via the pandemic situation. I mentioned this before. And this means that a lot of the people, while this time, find their security in the classic authoritarian dynamic, in the father authority, in a strong executive. You know, the government, the administration decided, and the scientists decided, and they say where to go to. And this is, in a way, was a social conform way to find security and authoritarianism. As it's very difficult to understand in German, I would be better in explaining it, but we have different ways. We understand authoritarian syndrome also as a way to find a prosthetic security, like prosthesis, to be safe, to live everyday life, and to be identified with something strong and powerful, to resist against the feeling of weakness against something like the virus. And you have different solutions for this need, and you can, most of the people found this authority in the strong executive of the government. And it was not so visible because it's a social conform way to satisfy your need. And those who are so loud on the streets were really a minority. Afterwards, now we have a growing incidence of those again. And this time there was another way to find this need satisfied. The younger one, this is a crucial point maybe, is that young in the adolescence, in a way, conspiracy narratives are part of the development. Yeah, there is always, were always a search in young adults and adolescents for something like are there aliens and explanation of this is a part of the normal development to become an adult, to get out of the family and test what theories are good for you and what is new, and everything is new, and you try to make sense of it. Maybe it's there are aliens, maybe there are conspiration, and so on. And the point is that we are living in a society where not only adolescents, but over all age, and you said it, also those people around 50 shows the same phenomenon. So we can say we are living in a society of adolescents in a way, because in a way it's a kind of regression. And I think this is a very interesting question. What makes something like a stage of development, a psychological stage of development, to something very common in society? Yeah, what are the social dynamics? What brings this needs up? And that's not directly an answer to your question, but for me it's a crucial point. Why something what is maybe a phenomenon and a part of an adolescent development is now something like a common ground in society. What happened? That also adults who passed this situation are looking for this again, like young adults. And I would say it has something to do with liberalized society in which everyone is always in a new situation, has to and is flexible and so on. and now has the same psychic way to deal with this as adolescent had over centuries before.
I agree with everything Oliver said. I would add that a couple of things. One, I think that one of the things that has attracted so many young men to the very conservative and far-right movements or opinions in the US has been a framing of those ideas as countercultural to a boring, triggered mainstream that just can't take a joke, right? Like that adults have, they see often adults as having been pushing a way of thinking that is too one note, too uniform on multiculturalism being good or gender equality being whatever it is. And this idea of resisting that has been successfully framed as countercultural. And so that's very attractive, right, to teenagers and to young adults and to young men in particular. And so one of the things we find is that this idea of pointing out where they're being manipulated to think that can be very powerful, right? So that goes back to decades of public health research, for example, in the US, showing that after 30 years of teaching kids in high school classes what eating healthier would do for them, for their long-term cholesterol or diabetes or heart risk, that had zero impact on the choices that they made about food they eat. But when researchers designed a study to show them how fast food companies were advertising in ways that effectively manipulate them to make choices that are not in the interests of their own bodies, but that line the pockets of those companies anyway, they did change their behavior. And they changed their behavior of boys more than girls, and it lasted for 2 months at least, and then they stopped the study. So they made healthier choices because they didn't like the idea that somebody else was controlling them, right, and manipulating them. And so I think this issue of control, of feeling in control, which we know is also one of the things that attract people to conspiracy theories, they feel a lack of control, is also kind of at the heart of a lot of these issues around countercultural, seizing back a sense of control, of feeling pressure, and then wanting to make their own choices that are different from what the mainstream says. And you can effectively help shift that by pointing out when they are being sold a package of something that benefits somebody else, whether that's an influencer online or a politician trying to get your vote, and help them be more skeptical of the content they consume. So that tends to be the area that we work in, but it doesn't also answer your question exactly about the demographic differences, but I'm happy to look that up for you. Yep.
I would like to add a few different points to that. I think it's really hard nowadays to separate between conspiracy theories and right-wing movements sometimes, and I don't know any right-wing movement who doesn't use conspiracy theories or promote them, even parties. And I think that's just an idea that I had the feeling in Germany that the media promoted the conspiracy theorists as crazy people, and the extremists as hard and I don't know, with some values maybe they're longing for. And I think that also makes a difference. And I would like to add the point of view that children or youth are not only confronted in schools or the internet with conspiracy theories, because we have so many second-generation adults in counseling who grow up with them. They talk about conspiracy theories while eating dinner with their parents. It's in their families, and I think that's a very important part of seeing youth and conspiracy theories.
Jenny, thank you. What a great point to end with as we go into further networking the intergenerational aspects of conspiracy theories. So as we know, they have an afterlife. They keep coming back as zombies, whether it's Pizzagate or other things. So thank you so much for listening, and thank you very much to our panelists.
Und natürlich auch ganz herzliches Dankeschön an Michelle Lehman für die Moderation. Okay, wir sind damit auch am Ende des ersten Tages angekommen, was das Programm angeht. Wir laden Sie aber herzlich ein, jetzt gern noch ein bisschen hier zu bleiben. Es gibt kleine Snacks im Foyer, beziehungsweise da, wo es vorhin den Kaffee auch gab. Und bleiben Sie gern noch, führen Sie auch die berühmt-berüchtigten informellen Gespräche, die man auf solchen Fachtagungen ja immer führt, die auch häufig sehr wichtig sind. Vernetzen Sie sich gerne und ansonsten geht es morgen dann hier weiter mit einer kurzen Vorstellung des Programms und einem kurzen Einblick auch in die Arbeit des Trägerverbunds, bevor wir dann um 10 Uhr in die Workshop-Phase 1 starten. Wir stellen die Workshops morgen noch vor. Ein Hinweis, wer sich noch nicht eingeschrieben hat für einen Workshop, das ist jetzt am Empfang noch möglich. Und für diejenigen, die uns leider heute verlassen, also die nur einen Tag hier sind, haben wir noch eine Bitte. In Ihren Mappen befindet sich auch ein Feedbackbogen und wir würden Sie bitten, wenn Sie heute schon gehen, den auch noch auszufüllen und dann bei uns am Empfang abzugeben. Ja, vielen Dank. Genau, das ist auch noch wichtig. Die anderen den bitte nicht im Hotel vergessen, sondern morgen dann abgeben. Vielen Dank nochmal an das Panel und uns allen einen schönen Abend. Dankeschön.